Let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about tonight is the concept of the growth theory of self-directed learning. And a lot of these, again, a lot of things overlap in the course. So I think as we get deeper into the course, and at this point we're almost halfway through, actually more than halfway through, we just see additional people coming into the picture with similar theories and pretty much their own spin to these theories. So grow has two conceptions of self-directed learning: self-teaching, all right, the student, and personal autonomy, the ability for students to work at their own pace and have control over their learning and the learning environment. And then there's the various stages. But overall, I mean, without going into reading every single stage, you see that, you know, as the stage gets higher, the student's independence and the professor or the instructor's role becomes more of a consultant role, consultant role, where you kind of, work on stuff yourself, kind of like what we're doing in this class. You work on the assignment and you just reach out to me for specific questions or, very, very specific things. But I wouldn't say it's as much as independent as perhaps like dissertation or individual. So I think we have a nice blend of facilitator stage 3 and 4. So my role is to kind of translate the information to you, and then you are the one that's going to process that information and work at your own pace to get to finish the things that you need to finish or reach your personal goals in the class. So Gerald Grow has proposed this model, and it allows teachers to develop and adapt their style to match that of the learner. So again, that whole idea of inclusive learning. And the model illustrates how the expert, quote unquote, the authority, right, the subject matter expert, is severely mismatched with that as a self-directed learner. So when you start at stage 1, I think of the typical classroom with the teacher standing in the front, when the children are taking notes at their desk type of thing, memorizing information and kind of taking multiple choice tests and providing the teacher with information that that the student has learned what the teacher has instructed. So we're getting into the idea of appropriate models of adult education really specify that adults don't learn that way. And unfortunately, some professors that teach adults sometimes conduct that, themselves that way, which is not really conducive for the adult brain to process information properly and understand information. So basically, a appropriate model is something, such as what I keep calling him Grow has proposed, which emphasizes a more facilitative approach, guided reflection, learning from experience, and of course, the adult learner relationship between him or herself and the trainer or facilitator. And then in addition to education, it's focused on whether, versus focused on the entire class or the entire group. It's the individual need of the learner that is focused on according to Grow. Again, as I said, a lot of the same ideas from different people. We look at Garrison's model of self-directed learning. Garrison was a Canadian professor at the University of Calgary, and he's published a lot of different things on distance learning and education. So again, just quickly going through the little pie pieces here, a self-motivation. Adult learners are motivated when they take responsibility of their own learning and the outcomes of their assessment projects and activities. The ability to self-manage, the ability to, control our behaviors. And in this chapter, it was pretty interesting when we got to the neurological aspects of, the way that, the more we grow, and I think it's just common sense, but it's nice to see it applied to educational learning and theory. The more we grow, the better we're able to control our reactions and our impulses to say certain things or do certain things, and kind of take into consideration the rest of the folks that are in the group as well. So self-management, the ability to resolve information or problems independently, and not necessarily always referring to the subject matter expert, but working things out on your own, right? Like exploratory kind of learning or experimental learning, discovery learning, that type of thing. Self-modification, of course, is the ability for us to actively take feedback and fix it or update. Like, for your article reviews and other assignments, I've given you specific feedback. And, the next article review, I expect the one that you submitted, I haven't started looking at those yet, which I will. Those, I expect to see a lot different or better, the say incorporation of something as simple as, let's say, APA. So, I pointed out a couple of folks. I forgot the title page and the references page was not, formatted correctly. Some of the in-text citations. So again, the feedback I gave, I as an instructor or facilitator, I expect that feedback to be reflected in your next, the following assignments that you do in the class. And then, of course, the ability to monitor your own thinking and actions and evaluate, how you see things and how you approach a content. So Garrison really defined self-directed learning as an approach where learners are motivated to assume personal responsibility and collaborative control of the way we process thinking, and as quote unquote self-monitoring and context, self-management. So he has kind of like a dichotomy versus, not a dichotomy, but a kind of like a two-part, theory where, one of the major components is the cognitive component, and then the second major component is a contextual component. And his work has been, focuses on the relationship between teaching, learning, and the communication process between instructors and learners. And he really believed that at the start of, after 2000 and the 21st century, distance learning had to be focused on interaction and communication, and of course, that whole idea of personalized learning. And he believed that by understanding this relationship between distance education, interaction, and communication, instructors and, of course, coordinators and trainers would be better able to meet the needs of the learners and make the learning process better for the learner. So communication is key in his theory. And more importantly, the takeaway from him is that he really emphasized the peer-to-peer, peer-to-professor interaction, which is reflected in some of our best practices now for, designing courses in higher education. The locus of control, the center of our control mechanisms, is defined as people's attribute, that we attribute the cause of our control events to the events themselves or to an external environment. So our ability to cause or control things is based on others around us or the situation in which we find ourselves. It's an internal process, and which is an attribute, we attribute control to the events, again, themselves, and then the external, which the outside forces. So, locus of control is basically an internal and an external process. And of course, constructivism is that idea that, community and society help us better understand what we're learning. To get into a little more detail about a couple of the terms that came up in this module, single loop learning versus double loop learning. So basically, single loop learning allows the learner to fit prior experiences with existing values. So it enables you as a learner to respond in an automatic way based on what you've done in the past. Double loop learning, as you can imagine, is quite the opposite of that. It's something that's new to you. It doesn't really fit into your prior experience or schema or, contextual framework. And it really requires you as a learner to change your mental schema in a fundamental way. So for example, the best example I can give is if you're changing your major in college, or you're starting a new career venture, you're a teacher of elementary school children and you decide to go to nursing school. Well, that's a huge example of double loop learning. I mean, going from elementary school teaching to nursing is completely different, not only education wise, but like language and environment and your role, things like that. So knowing in action versus reflection in action, the term is pretty self-explanatory. Knowing in action is that somewhat our automated responses are based on an existing schema. So again, it kind of goes side by side with single looping, I apologize. And it's based on our pre-existing understanding, and which enables us to perform our tasks efficiently and successfully. And then reflection and action is our ability to process, to reflect while we're performing tasks, to discover new information and new schema. So it goes hand in hand again with, double looping. So knowing an action equals single looping, or they're kind of related. I put a little heart. If I was teaching the class face to face, I would put, the two terms on the board and a little heart, between them. And then reaction and in action, a little heart between double looping and reflection and action, because they kind of go hand in hand. And then I just wanted to kind of briefly define this idea of schema and schema theory. So simply put, schema theory states that all knowledge is organized into units. And I think as professionals in the learning field, you kind of have been taught this from a very early age in your career. Give little bits of information instead of long information all at once, or a big amount of information all at once. So then a schema is a generalized description or a conceptual system of understanding knowledge, and how knowledge is presented and how it's used. So once we organize this knowledge into units, then we can come to some sort of a conclusion. Okay, and then according to the theory, schemata, or things in our environment that we encounter, or part of our contextual world, represents knowledge about concepts such as objects and relationships they have to other objects, situations, events, series of events, and sequence of actions. So, for example, a simple example is, think of your schema for a dog, right? What kind of things will you most likely have knowledge about? Well, they have four legs, they bark, they have sharp teeth, they have hair, they have tails, and even you might know specific information about certain breeds, like collies or Dachshunds or Springers or Springer Spaniels. So that is schema theory, the ability to have, it's like when you're brainstorming and you get everything you know about something on a paper. So that would be like an undergraduate version of schema theory. Get everything you know about this topic on paper and then see where you wind up. And then for our information processing, prior knowledge acts as a filter through our, attentional processes. So everything we experience, and this is a very deep philosophical concept of the 1900s or the 20th century philosophy, is that everything we experience goes through a filter. We are almost incapable of, sensing or perceiving things without some form of a bias based by our prior knowledge on the topic. So the result is that we tend to pay more attention to learning that kind of fits with our prior knowledge. It's as simple as you're browsing the internet, you find a couple of articles that you know something about. Those are kind of going to draw you more than if let's say you're studying, adult learning and motivation right for our class, and then you come across an article on, algebraic equations, for example. You may be very good at algebraic equations, but right now you're really focusing more on the whole idea of, adult learning, motivation, how we process information, etc. Memory research, again, three components of memory. Main components are sensory, what we see, feel, touch, or the senses, our short-term memory, and our long-term memory. We're going to get a little bit into that in a few minutes. So basically, experience affects sensory memory through the process of attention and selecting what information we need to process. So that's basically how we discriminate, our experiences and process the knowledge the newly acquired knowledge that we're seeing in our, environment or schema. So constructivism, just as we talked about constructivism, but it's part of this chapter, so I wanted to, bring it up again, is basically that the idea that all knowledge is context bound, and that individuals make personal meaning of their learning experiences, and that new information must be related to something that we already know in order for us to be able to remember it and apply it. And then finally, the concept of readiness to learn. And again, this is kind of, review. We are ready to learn and open to learning when the situation forces us to be open to it. So let's say you tried to do a graduate degree prior, and you had to stop going to school because, as a woman, I maybe had a child, and it becomes too overwhelming to study full-time or pursue a graduate degree while I'm taking care of a newborn. So, I'm not ready to learn at that point. And that's really what readiness to learn means. The more adult learning professionals can anticipate and understand about adults' life situation and learner readiness, the more effective they can be. And then you all did Kolb's learning theory, and I started reading through some of the some of your results, and I did it myself, but I don't think I did it correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and sit down over the weekend and kind of print out the paper and do it one more time. I got an unexpected result, and I was kind of I always have conceptualized myself as being abstract, but I got active experimentation for some reason. So maybe it's accurate. Maybe with age and experience and all these other new things that have happened in my life since, my daughter was born and all that stuff, maybe it's changed, the way I'm, kind of wired in my brain. So anyways, so just to, just kind of refresh your memory, Kolb's learning theory was founded in 1974, and he set out to, defend 4 distinct learning styles, which are based on 4-stage learning. And that's what we're looking at now. And he just believed that people naturally prefer to learn in a different style. And then, of course, later in the chapter, we learn about, learning versus cognitive style. So, learning processing versus cognitive processing. So quickly concrete experience, a new experience or situation that is encountered, or a reinterpretation of an existing experience was concrete learning. Feel it, experience it, see it. Then the next step is, or level or stages, is reflective observation of the new experience. Particularly important if there are inconsistencies between the new experience and your understanding of the new experience. So you got to look at it from different angles, different perspectives. And then, abstract conceptualization reflects, reflection gives rise to a new idea. This is where you kind of come up with your own theory, you come up with your own take, let's say, on a specific idea or theory. Like, for example, you're working on your final project. You're actively engaged in abstract, conceptualization. And then finally, active experimentation, when you actually try it out. So after you leave my class and you submit your project and you're proposing your project, a specific teaching method or a style or a learning style or a theory, then you go after my class, you go to work and you apply that and you do kind of like a little pilot study for yourself and see how it works, and then modify things that need to be modified. So the 2 continuums, this is it's kind of confusing to me because of I'm not a very analytical math person. So what I had to do to fully understand this, so I could kind of explain it to you more clearly, is really just break it down into 2 basic, components, which is processing continuum, which is how we approach a task. Okay. And that's the north-south axis. So up, down, the vertical axis. And then the perception continuing. So basically our emotional response, or how we feel about a certain thing. So again, these various factors influence your personal preferred style of learning. So for example, your social environment, your educational experiences, whatever influences your choice of style, it's actually a product of both of these 2 variables. So you need to be in 2 of these quadrants on either side of that north-south to be able to really be specific, or kind of, determine what your specific preference is. So again, just to highlight Kolb's terminology for these 4 learning styles is diverging, assimilating, converging, and accommodating. So I'm going to go over each one of them real quick, so you kind of have a general idea of the differences. And move, and try to kind of maybe reinterpret or better understand your own results. So diverging, feeling and watching, okay, which is a combination of our, of course, the ability for us to look at things from different perspectives. People that are diverging are sensitive. They kind of prefer to watch than do. They gather information to kind of solve problems, and they're very good at viewing concrete situations from various viewpoints. And he called this diverging because these people perform better actually in situations that require ideas and generation. So the think tanks, the researchers, brainstorming. So those are the folks that better work with, diverging style. And then assimilating. So watching and thinking, folks that like to watch and think about a situation or an idea. And it involves a concise, logical approach. These folks are very logical. Ideas and concepts are more important than people. These people require good explanation rather than a practical opportunity. So very specific parameters. and they excel at understanding a wide range of information and organizing it in a clear, logical format. And people with assimilating learning styles are less focused on people and really more focused on ideas and abstract concepts. So it's pretty interesting. I think that's where I kind of fall. So when I do that test again, I'll kind of see what it gives me, and maybe I'll learn something new about myself. And finally, not finally, but next to finally, converging, folks that are doing the doing and the thinking. So folks with converging learning styles can solve problems and use their learning to find solutions to practical issues. These folks prefer technical tasks. They're really, again, less concerned with people and interpersonal aspects, so they're similar to assimilating in that aspect. And they really try to go out of their way to find practical uses for theories and ideas. So these are the folks that are using deductive thinking. So they're taking an idea or a concept and applying it in various situations. And these folks can solve problems and make decisions by finding solutions to questions and answers. And then finally, the accommodating personality, the doing and feeling personality, is a hands-on style personality, and it relates more on intuition rather than logic. And folks that are accommodating use other people's analysis and prefer to take a practical, experiential approach. So they're attracted to new challenges and experiences and try to carry out plans and kind of go with that gut instinct. So those accommodating gut instinct rather than logical analysis. So those accommodating folks really believe in what their initial response to something is. Expectancy theory. Okay, so we have 3 motivating factors in expectancy theory: the belief that we have a certain effort, and I think of this in a classroom, but more so in a work situation, that we are confident and we expect to be recognized for our hard work. For example, a raise or a promotion or additional responsibilities. Instrumentality, the ability or the probability that the valued outcomes will be received given certain outcomes that have occurred. So if you have clear goals, you have clear objectives, that you're able to successfully meet those because they have been given to you in a very specific way, and you've been given the correct tools to meet them. And then valence is the value view. Value valence is the value that we place on those outcomes. So how much do we want that raise? How much do we want that promotion? So expectancy theory of motivation really emphasizes the need for organizations to relate rewards directly to performance. Okay, so those PEP or the performance evaluations, they need to be tied into a specific reward. And this is what Victor Harold Bloom developed in 1964 after he conducted an empirical study on motivating factors behind certain courses of action, particularly in organizational leadership. So Vroom is a household name for organizational leadership. So if that's something you guys are interested in, that's your man, Vroom. And of course, as mentioned earlier, the expectancy theory of motivation has been developed by focusing on 3 major factors: effort, performance, and outcomes. So effort to performance, expectancy, is really the state of thinking or hoping for something to happen. According to this theory, it's essential for expectancy of an individual to be higher for his motivation to be higher. So a performance outcome or instrumentality. Instrumentality, again, is an individual's perception regarding the connection between performance and outcomes. An individual's motivation is also influenced by the possibility of actualization rewards. So basically the feeling that we are going to get the reward that we were promised by our manager, whether it's real or illusory. If it's illusory, then it will definitely be negatively influenced. If it's something that they talk, a lot of talk, no action kind of thing. Put your money where your mouth is sort of thing. And then the outcomes of the goal. So the valence is, again, the anticipated satisfaction or dissatisfaction that an individual feels towards the outcomes or the rewards. So good rewards, then more motivation, better outcomes. So although rewards are known for the amazing influence it has on people, it has to be satisfactory for it truly to motivate a person. So for valence to be positive, the outcomes must be able to address our employees' individual needs, desires, values, what we want to do, our aspirations. So we're going to spend a little time talking about Wadlowski's 5 pillars of instructor motivation, expertise, empathy, clarity, and cultural responsiveness. Expertise obviously seems pretty straightforward. Subject matter experts. We know our topic. Others like to learn it, and we're willing to share our knowledge. So in this case, we are the experts, and we're willing to share our knowledge. And we think that sharing our knowledge is beneficial to other folks, other learners. So, but understanding learners really helps us tie the lesson to their experiences as realistically as possible. And Woodlowski points out that the importance of having a thorough instruction plan, like blueprints, lesson plans, that provides a solid foundation for our training or a class or a lesson is really essential for us to be able to converge our expertise effectively to those that are learning it. Empathy, of course, pretty self-explanatory. We need to understand what our learners need from us and how we can address their personal goals. So in my class, for example, I try to, always, give you examples for a lesson, either from something I've experienced or something that you might be experiencing in work or something you can apply directly to your position. Learning in a classroom, for example, or learning in an online virtual classroom, whatever it is, physical, virtual, really means cooperation between the instructor and the learners. And he stresses that we must listen to understand in the classroom from benefit for experiences of others. And I can't recall exactly now, but if I find the instrument or tool that I use, I'll share it with you with the class. I did like a survey on how well of a listener I am, and I was very surprised to really learn that I wasn't a good listener at all, and how much information I was missing from others because I always try to either predict what the person was going to say or thought I knew the answer, and it's not that I think I'm better than everybody, but it's kind of an instinct. Our personality might have something to do with that, who knows, but I thought that was really interesting to find out how bad of a listener I really was. Enthusiasm, of course, you got to act like you like your what you're doing, what you're teaching, what your students are speaking about. So the whole, I can make this reference in my graduate class because you guys probably remember, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, right? Bueller, Bueller, Bueller. That professor was not enthusiastic at all, and not even does doing roll call, like nothing. And that also transpires with the way your students perceive the knowledge. If you don't think it's important, hey, why should they? Clarity. This is pretty simple. Make sure you always have a takeaway for each lesson. Make sure, if you give a huge amount of information, that you give students bullets, small highlights, what's going to be on the test kind of notes, so that the learning won't be degraded. It's important for you to provide really clear examples and about yourself, about your personal situation. Students really, and I hope I'm effective in this way when I relate my personal experience to you guys, you relate with me better. You relate to me a little bit better, and you see me as a person, not as just your instructor. So a lesson plan, objectives, that sort of thing is very, very important. Always providing that information. And finally, cultural responsiveness is creating a learning environment that is respectful of the opinions and experiences of others. Each individual is unique and brings diversity to the learning session. So again, the whole idea of inclusivity, having an inclusive learning environment is key here. So I want to talk about the individual differences on adult learners here. Cognitive abilities, fluid abilities, crystallized abilities, spatial intelligence. This section was very dense. And when I tried to discriminate what stuff I'm going to be talking about tonight, it was really hard to because everything seems so important, but it's very difficult to if you're not, immersed in this every day, doing research and talking about it and lecturing about it on this particular, topic. It's very difficult to and I'm by no means an expert on just, cognitive abilities or, cognitive controls. This is part of my knowledge for the entire idea of, what motivates you as a learner and as an employee. But so I'm just going to cover a few of them. I'm going to cover fluid abilities, crystallized abilities, and then spatial intelligence for these cognitive abilities. And then we'll talk about primary mental abilities. So fluid abilities are the drive of individuals to think and act quickly to solve problems. Okay, so basically it's our ability to quickly understand and apply the information, and our ability to draw upon secondary relational abstractions or secondary sources to primary relational. information. So the ability to think about different things that relate to the topic or the knowledge that we're acquiring. So it could be completely different topics, but have something in similarity that you can use to resolve an issue. Crystallized abilities stems from learning and acculturation. So basically, this type of ability is ability to take a test, to understand general information, of not knowledge information, to use language and vocabulary eloquently, writing skills, personality factors, maybe motivation and education and cultural opportunity are central to this development. And it's only through indirectly dependent on the physiological influence that mainly affect fluid ability. So basically, crystallized ability are those set skills that we learned, that we practice every day: writing, reading, taking a test, understanding, workplace rules, following them. And then fluid is our ability to solve problems by kind of tapping into the other types of similar situations that we have at our fingertips, that we know about, to solve an issue. So secondary sources to resolve a primary issue. And then spatial intelligence is basically very simple. It's our ability to comprehend three-dimensional shapes. And basically, this is just to kind of like distinguish the right brain versus left brain theory. Your right brain is the one solving problems, mapping, construction, engineering things. And then your left brain is the one that is more emotional and processing and intuitive and creative and things like that. Okay. Hopefully those three little definitions kind of clarify things for you. Primary mental abilities refer to 7 factors identified by Louis Leon Thurston. So these are Thurston's factors, 7 factors. And the 7 factors are primary abilities are basically our ability to speak, the amount of words we know, our ability to tell, what's far, what's near, numbers. So very specific logic, and our knowledge of basic information. I worked for a very long time at Barry, specifically in the Learning Center. And back then we had which is still there. They just call it a different thing, but it was a comprehensive program for students with learning disabilities and exceptional exceptionally very I can't get the term right now, but students with learning disabilities and deficit disorders and things like that. And one of the exams that we required the students to come in, and I was not a director, but I was very close to the director, and she would share some of the knowledge of these particular types of tests, was the WISE test, the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale. And basically it's an IQ test designed to measure intelligence and cognitive ability. So that's primary mental ability. So the very specific knowledge that we're able to, use, kind of like the SAT type of thing. And then finally getting into cognitive controls is the processes by which our goals or plans influence our behavior. Okay. You can also refer to this as executive control. You may have heard that term instead. And this is the process that can inhibit automatic responses and influence working memory. So it really, supports flexible, adaptive responses. So it's our ability to really think about things before we blurt out an answer, kind of like maybe what my 5-year-old does, when she's talking to me. Field independent versus dependent learners, very simply defined. Field independent, this is again under cognitive controls, is the ability to learn information independently of external cues. So, for example, field independent learners prefer situations in which they have to figure out the underlying organization of information, like transferring knowledge. They prefer independent, contract-oriented learning environments, and they really respond well to discovery and inquiry learning. And then our field-dependent tend to see and rely on cues in the environment. So they're more group-oriented and collaborative in their learning preference, and they really need a clear structure of organization of material. So they're less into kind of figuring out on their own and kind of working within specific parameters, given that. So the basic takeaway of those two different types of learners is a person that is a field-dependent learner may have issues with self-directed learning. So while self-directed learning is promoted in adult learning theory, it may be problematic for those learners that are really, really dependent or like working in groups or teams. Cognitive styles, very simply put, basically is a style of thinking that is a concept used in cognitive psychology to describe the way individuals think, perceive, and remember information. And our cognitive style, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, is different from our learning style. So they're related, but they're definitely not the same thing. So let's look at exactly what the differences are between cognitive and learning styles. So cognitive style you're born with, you're not necessarily taught. This is how your brain works from birth. Your parents started seeing this, when you were very little, maybe when you're 7 or 8 years old. And then there's specific ways of acquiring information. So it's really fixed. And then a learning style is a learning preference. So let's say, you prefer to study in a quiet area. You prefer to study with music on. You prefer to study at night versus in the morning. So that's the difference between cognitive and learning style. So for a long time, these people, especially the 80s and 90s, a lot of people use these two terms interchangeably, but they are very different. So let's talk a little bit about the difference. So processing information and learning styles. The way we process information or cognitive processing is global information processing. Take in the whole picture first and then focus on the details. So it's good for analysis. It's how we interpret information. Looking at information in a linear manner versus a holistic manner. And, you focus on one element at a time, and we learn in that kind of like very unit-based learning. And our brain takes information in that way, and then it stores it in our brain in whatever way that we, I guess, assign it to. And then again, our learning styles, there's two key differences between learning styles and cognitive styles. And learning styles include cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. So that's how they're related. But it's a preference. This is what we choose. And of course, the way we process information is heavily influential on our learning style. And then, of course, including characteristics of instructional settings along with learning. So you guys are in an online class. Some of you may have had a choice. Some of you may have not had a choice. But if you chose to be in an online environment, it's because that's probably your preferred way of learning. If you had no choice, well, that really isn't applicable to you because you're here because of necessity, because of location, et cetera, et cetera. The types of learning, this is taken from the chapter PowerPoint, so it's pretty straightforward. Natural learning, it's natural, it's things that learning moments, teaching moments, things that we encounter in our environment without necessarily asking or needing to learn, just things that we happen to come across, a statistic, an article we read. And then formal learning, which is basically what we're doing now in this class. You're sitting here listening to my lecture and probably asking me to finish quickly or thinking, Ms. Stefano, let's go. So it's formal learning. It's stuff that we take in from another individual who may be a subject matter expert, and then apply it to our situation and our style. And then, of course, we have the personalized learning, which is, again, the whole idea to be self-directed, managing a learning process, how we prefer to learn, and how we prefer people to give us tasks, in which ways. Do we need a lot of parameters, or do we kind of can putter our way around and figure stuff out? Again, this is taken from our PowerPoint for the chapter, so this may be familiar to you. 3 aspects of learning: reason, emotion, and action. Again, reason is probably the most important one in the sense that it's concerned with the management or the organization of thinking, than really thinking itself. So it's thinking about thinking, or like what we're doing in this class. You're probably thinking a lot of thinking here, but you're probably pondering, to use a different word, why you think a certain way or why you interpret something in a specific way. And that's really what reason is. It's metacognition. It's our ability to really question our own thinking processes, actually. It's more than one. So emotion, again, how we feel about something, and then action. And we saw this earlier on in the presentation with Growth and Garrison, or they talked about, making sure that, these three areas, action, learning, making learning applicable to our situation, influencing others, was part of self-directed learning. Again, taken from our PowerPoint for this week. Instrumental learning, technical learning, social learning, and developmental learning. Again, technical learning, the nuts and bolts of things and how to, do a project or a report or, run a program, a computer program, a software. How that learning, social, how that learning relates to others and how it benefits others. And then, of course, developmental learning how to develop oneself as a person and a learner. So either by training or, by learning something and then teaching it to someone else. So as a learner, as a teacher, it's always a learning process, and it's developing deeper understanding for the things that we already know that we perhaps need more of a deep dive into. Again, a lot of this is review. That's why I'm kind of going quickly through some of these slides more than others. Learning needs is the gap between the learner's current level of knowledge and skills, and the level of knowledge and skills required to perform a task or a set of tasks. So that's basically what a learning gap is. And then the needs of learners, of course, is learning that gap between what my students know and what they need, where they need to be to complete a task. And that's really the magic of being a trainer or a professor or instructor is, number one, understanding, doing a needs assessment or pre-test, post-test model, making sure that, that you understand where everybody is in your class or your seminar, your training session, and making sure that everybody might be on different levels starting, but that everybody is on the same level when finishing. Eventually, they all need to do the same thing, whether it's in their own way or whatever, but they need to understand, what the end result will be, what the deliverable will be. Again, some folks need a refresher and reading or writing or math skills, when they come back to college. I mean, that's very normal. Perhaps you're in a field where I don't think anybody in this situation, in this course, meets that criteria, but perhaps you're in a field where you do a lot of report writing, or you're a paralegal and you do a lot of legalese writing. So writing for an academic class, your first paper might be a disaster because you're writing in what you know best. So that's where the teacher comes in, or professor comes in, or instructor, facilitator, and says, well, so-and-so, you really should use, so you really need some writing skills. Here are some resources that you can use to improve that, and offer you resources and information. I need to understand my learners in my class, that understand their personal, strengths and weaknesses. Part of that is reading, really, and I really stress this when I do webinars for faculty, read those personal introductions. I don't care if they've copied and pasted it in 5,000 classes. I'm not in those classes with them. This is my class. And I want to know exactly where you're coming from so I can tailor the lesson to you specifically. And then the skills to perform in 3 learning processes, again, very common, self-directed, again, more independent, collaborative, more dependent, and then, of course, the institution, what you're expected to do in a class or for your performance evaluation, that sort of thing, for the institution, the goals of the organization. This is pretty much amplifying what the previous slide mentioned. So I'm not going to go through each one of these, but the different categories are the same as the previous slide. But I liked this image because it really gives a lot of information and suggestions and examples of each different category. So when you go back and you review the lesson, this might be one of the ones that you want to maybe take a screenshot of and kind of maybe bookmark it somehow and maybe refer to it a little bit more when you have a little bit more time to kind of, process. So it really does a great job in succinctly summarizing the 3 different areas, areas of adult learning needs, and then, gives you examples. So I hope you find this helpful. Okay, so we're coming to kind of like full circle with this particular module, training and development. So we're looking at organizational needs, different types of training. Again, things we've all seen before: workshops, coaching lessons, self-study, practice, Those are very basic. I think they've been around forever. Um, the different types of adult theories, which we're going to talk about in a minute, and then the different dimensions of adult learning and the change theory. So we're not going to talk about the first four. I think those are pretty self-explanatory. I think we're going to actually focus on the last three. So the lifespan perspective was really the best example of how we mature as learners. And I like this chart a lot. Again, I preferred it more than the one that they had in the chat, book PowerPoint, because it really shows you how we go from just trusting someone, and it's almost like you can apply this to a new relationship as an adult. You meet somebody, maybe in a personal relationship, a friend or a new partner, whatever. And it starts like this, you gotta trust them first. Then, you start sharing a little bit about yourself. Then, you maybe do things that you feel guilty about, and then so on and so on. I'm gonna go through one of these stages, but it's almost like, your mental ability to process information grows with your age and your maturity level, which I think is interesting. So hopefully, even though we're very old, probably by the time we get to integrity versus despair, we're very knowledgeable and we're very wise. So it's not all bad. So anyways, again, another good Erik Erikson model here for you to, just have your bookmark, keep in mind. Again, quickly, adult learning theories, implications for adult learning professionals. Again, adult learning is inextricably intertwined with our development, and we can take multiple paths to get to that knowledge. We are the ability to process knowledge and learning has the stages that we just looked at with Erikson, for example. We have to be readiness to learn. That's our motivation. Our ability to, the moment we say we're ready to do something, we're motivated and we'll get it done. The moment we're forced into it, then that's when kind of things get a little shaky and, maybe we don't do such a great job or as good of a job as we wanted to do in the beginning. And then finally, the whole idea of the stages of development and the ability to tailor make learning experiences to meet that stage. So, so giving the general, age range, let's say, of a typical master's degree student, you assume that, for example, that person has been working in the field for some time, that person has some contextual knowledge of the topic from the course, those sorts of things, not specifically related to age specifically, but to a stage of development. All right, so that concludes module 4. And I just want to remind you, I can't see the chat while I'm sharing my screen and presenting. So if you do have questions, and again, I can't tell if you have questions at this point, I'm sorry, excuse me, but I really don't want to stop sharing while I'm presenting. So I will address anything in the chat box if there's anything there once we're done. And again, I'm going to quickly move through module 5. I just picked the major ideas of module 5 regarding technologies and technology's influence on learning and motivation. So this slide pretty much it shows you the different new and improved types of learning that we have at our fingertips that we didn't have, let's say, 20 years ago, as readily available. I remember that I graduated from FIU in 1998 with my master's, and they were just launching their first online program in 1998. So it was like, it hasn't been that long since we have been engaged in online learning. And so at this point, we have, obviously everything, we deliver everything through the internet. We have digital books. Some of these are in your slides from the module PowerPoint, but some of these I added on my own because I just brainstormed a little bit. Possibilities of virtual connections with experts worldwide, the ability to connect with somebody in China, for example, that's a neurosurgeon and has knowledge of a specific experiment, so that sort of connectivity. The world is getting smaller. I thought about open educational resources of Creative Commons. If you haven't tapped into those, that's an excellent resource for students and even your own children if they have experience, they need more information about a certain idea or topic that they're writing about in school. Great free copyright resources that you can use without necessarily having to give credit, legally having to give credit to those sources. So please, if you haven't looked into OERs, might be something you want to look into. All the how-to videos, Nameless, and there's a million other websites. I just started with the big three: Lynda, YouTube, and Khan. And of course, our sophisticated learning management systems and content management systems, such as Canvas. The amount of information and just content that I can upload into our classroom and share with you at any time of the day, 24/7, is unbelievably amazing. So it's, equity and accessibility are the two areas that we focus on when we talk tech and learning and motivation. Equity meaning the ability for everyone to equally access the same material. It's very important when you're designing an online program or an online course, and the ability to be able to access. And I mean accessibility to be, yes, log into and have the access, but I mean more specifically for those folks that need to use screen readers or interpreters, or they're have visually impaired, those types of things. So accessibility in that sense as well, ADA stuff, aka ADA stuff. This is a pretty cool statistic. I found that it's pretty recent. I think it's from 2015. So I'm sure it's a lot higher now. It's been 4 years. But the more technology people have, the likely they'll be able to, learn more, get into their learning. So I think for the first time, I'm not a proponent of excessive technology, but I do see that with technology at our fingertips, we're constantly reading stuff. We're constantly being exposed to new information. We're reading stuff digitally at any time on our phones, on our iPads, or our tablets, whatever the case is. And I just thought it was staggering, how many people access information on their phones at home. And I know that people use their phones a lot, but this is kind of a nice stat for you guys to have by the Pew Research Center. So it's a reputable source. So it's interesting. It's a good information. I love statistics. I love numbers. I love polls. And this is a good one here. So technology's access, of course, better access to resources. Like I mentioned, look at our classroom, look at the stuff we have, access to 24/7, right then and there. All you have to do is log into Canvas and it's all yours. The ability for me to use the technology to help you engage through these sessions, or I know they're not really that interactive because we are very limited in time and we have a lot of content to get through. But again, it goes beyond the classroom. It goes beyond the four walls. Self-paced learning, you guys, I'm pretty flexible with your learning. I don't have a lot of hard due dates. So again, the good, the bad, and the ugly of flexibility. So again, technology could definitely give more opportunities to discover the potential relationship between teaching and learning, right? A powerful role of process of learning when the learners use the technology and media as cognitive tools and as repositories of information rather than going to a tutor or an instructor. So I give you enough info for you guys to probably figure out a problem and not necessarily have to ask me every time you have a question. And then, of course, increased access to technology in school is associated with proficiency and understanding your ability to use it. So those are some of the good, some of the not so good aspects we want to kind of just think about is, again, opportunity gap. And these are things that I started thinking about this afternoon as I was kind of filling in the gaps of the lesson tonight. Not everybody has internet. Not everybody has the money to buy software or access to buy software, certain hardware or software. And I think of certain countries that maybe have a more authoritarian political system or have, for whatever reason, religious or beliefs that don't allow them to use certain types of hardware, software, or even get online, use some of the social media. So again, it's that opportunity gap. Not everybody has access to everything. So it's still not equitable in the way we'd like to see it. If it's not personalized, it may not be effective to you. So a lot of general information out there, maybe just general info may not be specific to your needs. And then you might, not be able to gain a deeper understanding. Some technical and psychological issues that have come up. Of course, people, are distracted. They expect instant gratification, with whatever they get online, whether it's a text, whatever it's a text message or an email, they want to answer right away. And the argument that we lose the cognitive ability because we have everything at our fingertips. I remember when I was in college, I had to go to the library to find out information. I didn't have the internet. I mean, it wasn't it wasn't something that we use at home. I had it at FIU. I used the library database and I looked at articles online and that sort of thing, but it really was nothing compared to what we have today. Some social issues, again, this is a common argument, especially if we're parents, the idea that technology creates a lack of social skills. Again, online dating is a perfect example of that. Some of you may be for it, some of you may against it. I'm kind of mixed where I feel about in that aspect. I think it's good because it exposes you to all kinds of different people, but it also, again, adds to that whole idea of hiding behind the screen. Isolation, of course, and then, of course, technology and depression, which have been linked to, suicide, as part of that depression has been linked to social media and bullying and online bullying and all that stuff. And then, of course, just basic health issues, vision, hearing, neck strain, sitting too much, being a sedentary lifestyle. Again, a very rich image here. Just Americans' views on the impact of technology on everyday life, again, from 2015. A little bit outdated, but probably pretty much relevant today, maybe a little bit higher today. And I like the way they put it in so far as the generational. I love generational studies, and if you guys are NPR fans, National Public Radio or WLRN, they had an interesting segment on OK Boomer, that whole meme, which I found interesting, and this reminded me of that, so I kind of wanted to put it in here. But look how many people believe in the negative aspects of technology and look at the different perceptions. But, even the millennials, technology has become too distracting. But yet at the same time, they love it, and so on and so forth. So you see some of these contradictions in even the way Americans from different generations view technology. And again, just, self-direction, no more traditional learning in the classroom. This is what we see in the future. And of course, everything is going to be based on the ability for us to seek information and seek information and then apply information relatively independent of anybody telling us or guiding us, or in the capacity of an advisor, for example. So, whereas, and it varies very personal, but in larger institutions, you might have a student go through an online orientation problem and then, go through some kind of a questionnaire to get advising on academics instead of speaking or meeting with an advisor, that sort of thing. And then just some basic trends in adult learning. You can maybe Google some of these if you're interested. I think some of these, again, are very familiar to us, virtual reality, using different kinds of devices in a classroom, whether it's virtual or face-to-face, AI, redesigned learning spaces, let's say virtual breakout sessions, for example, gamification, the idea that, we earn a badge or points for certain activities, checklists, things like that, polling, that sort of thing. And then to finish off, I found this image, which is a very good image. And so I really wanted to know who Medina was. And he is a biologist, developmental molecular biologist specifically, which I assume that he's studying, our bodies and cells and how they reproduce and, die and are born and all that good stuff. And his interests were genetic, characterization of genes involved in human brain development. And his focus was psychiatric disorders. And he spent most of his life as an analytical research consultant. So I just wanted to give you some background on who I'm using to compare Knowles. I think his bullets are pretty much very similar to what we find in our own book. I just found the graphic to be very helpful because it's very succinct, it's very clean. And then I just wanted to kind of just throw in there that an argument could be made that an online education, since we are all talking about online education, in being a component of we're participating in online education, has the potential to better adhere to what the brain wants to do naturally. And he says that they do this by increasing both learning and memory. And if differences between children and adult education, how the brain learns best, and the efficiency and effectiveness of uniform information transfer that online education is known, then neuroandragogy, which is a very new field of study, that's an actual term and a field of study, neuroandragogy through online education appears to provide the appropriate and necessary paradigm shift in adult education. So when you look at Medina's points on the left, which again they kind of they blend in with a lot of the other theories out there, it really sounds like you're describing adult learning, and it's very similar to what we need to do as adults with our aging brains. And there was a whole section in our textbook, and I know I'm skipping a lot of that because again, it's one of those things that's very dense and you need to spend a lot of time kind of going through it. But I just think about, for example, my grandparents, and maybe perhaps an elderly family member that you might have, that whole idea with forgetting certain things, or just not being able to be quick on their feet. Maybe when we're driving, we get frustrated with those elderly drivers. Get out, because it's just in their mind or in their life, they were acting and behaving like they always did. They accommodate. They don't see themselves as being slower. Some of them will acknowledge, but cognitively and consciously, they're not really thinking, oh, I'm slower at this, and they're not constantly analyzing their situation. But anyways, I think this was a good graphic to share with you. And then again, this is the graph that I chose for the cognitive processing, from the moment we see something to the moment we bring it into our mind, into sensory memory, then working memory, and then long-term memory, etc. So the whole idea of how our brain processes information, and how this is actually more in depth than what the book, the one that we had in the PowerPoint. It kind of shows you the capacity of units and how long it takes. So this is what we should show our students or our trainees that like to cram. This is a good thing to put up on your office if you work with students at any level, like in an academic setting. So this is really what they need to really see, so they know why cramming is not really in the long run going to help them in any way, and maybe in the short term too. And this is again from our PowerPoint. Quickly, I know where it's after 10. First principle, neuroscience supports for andragogy principle number 1, the need to know. This is from our textbook. Andragogy situates individuals' learning as a need to know the who, what, why, and where before committing to the presented learning journey. Okay, so as need to know. Stuff that we don't need to know, we throw it out, right? What's important to me, optional assignments, I don't want to do optional assignments, that kind of thing. So again, that whole idea of what we think is important to us and what we want to learn, what we choose to learn, rather. Principle 2 is learner's self-concept, the advanced development of our cortex functions or our brain functions to provide a basis and a foundation for self-directed learning, the ability to access information independently is again part of that learner self-concept. And then of course a combination of adults, our executive functions, meaning our natural or physiological abilities, and how that influences our ability to be self-directed. Principle number 3, again, experience. Results in neuroscience field indicate that new information entering the brain is processed via prior neurological networks. Again, that whole idea of schema. So principle 3 is schema. Past experiences are encoded with either the denotation of being negative or positive. So again, we judge the information as we see it. And new information, again, associated with previous experiences in the positive experiences in the past. So again, a lot of this is review of what we learned earlier in the lesson, what we talked about earlier in the lesson. And then principle 4, readiness to learn. We've talked about that. Maslow's hierarchy comes to mind here, and all the other examples we've used tonight. Principle number 5, orientation to learning. The release of neurotransmitters intensifies in accordance to enhancements of learning. So we all talk about serotonin is one of those neurotransmitters. The more we like something, the more it makes us feel happy, the more motivated we are to get more of it. So andragogy practitioners frame adult learners' motivations and aptitude based on some of these ideas of the the neurotransmitters. And then finally, principle number 6, our motivation to learn. And neuroscience confirms that positive emotions provoke higher levels of neurotransmitters. I think that's self-explanatory. If a professor does a class well, is pleasant, is understanding, is flexible, you're going to be more motivated to do stuff for that professor versus one that you really can't relate to, or has different personality, or our emotions are a huge factor in our ability to learn. Okay, so that's in a nutshell what we covered in modules 4 and 5. So next week is Thanksgiving, so enjoy. There's our turkey running from the cutting board. And our next session is going to be on December 4th.